Good morning, friends. Before we begin today, I wanted to take a moment to introduce you or reintroduce you to someone who inspired the way I'm telling my stories here on Sunshine Strategies Radio, Mr. Paul Harvey. Now, if you grew up in the Midwest like I did and still live here, you probably remember his voice. Steady, deliberate, and unmistakable. He was one of America's most beloved radio broadcasters, famous for his news and commentary, but even more so for the rest of the story. Each day he'd share a little known tale about history or human nature or the hidden truth behind a headline. And just when you thought you knew where it was going, he'd hit you with a twist. And then he'd close, softly but firmly, and now you know the rest of the story. So today I'm borrowing a little of Paul Harvey's spirit. I've been thinking about him off and on for the last few weeks because there's a story we all think we know, but the truth is deeper, darker, and more important than one man's name. So if you're new here, welcome. This is Sunshine Strategies Radio, and I am Jen McMillan, the founder and your host. Every week, we shine a light on what's really happening in our communities, our country, and our democracy. We make sense of the headlines in a way that families can understand, and we talk about how ordinary people, just like you and me, can build a better future right where we are. Because democracy isn't something we vote for in every 4 years. It's something that we practice every day. So today I wanted to talk about a story that continues to rattle the United States. A story about power, silence, and the way corruption hides in plain sight. And I'm sure this name is not going to come to any surprise to any of you, because I'm talking about Jeffrey Epstein today. But I don't think this is just about one man, because the rest of the story is about us. Once upon a time, there was a boy from Brooklyn. His father worked for the Parks Department. He didn't graduate from college, but he did have a way of making people trust him. Soon, he was teaching at an elite private school in Manhattan. Then, he was working on Wall Street. Then he was managing money for the wealthy. Then, well, he wasn't just managing their money. He was managing their secrets. He bought a mansion. He bought an island. He bought a jet and filled it with guests. Guests with last names I think you might know. Presidents, princes, tech billionaires, scientists, and CEOs. And in the shadows of his glittering world, there were children. Trafficked, silenced, broken. Now, this is where the story should have ended, right? One man caught, one man punished, but it didn't end. He struck deals with prosecutors, got sweetheart sentencing, and returned to luxury living. Until finally, in 2019, the law caught up with him. He was arrested, jailed, and just weeks later, found dead in his cell. Cameras? They malfunctioned. The guards? They fell asleep. And with that, the names, the evidence, the who else of it all slipped into a fog. And now you know the rest of that story. Except do we? Because the rest of the story just isn't about except do we? Because the rest of the story isn't just Jeffrey Epstein. It's a bigger question. How does someone like him, someone who's hurt so many for so long, stay protected? And here's the harder part. We already know the answer. It's because he moved in a world where power protects itself, where money buys silence, where the law bends not for truth, but for influence. Epstein is gone, but the condition that let him exist, they're still here. What do we do with that? First, we have to name it out loud. We admit that democracy doesn't work if it only protects some of us. Second, we shine a light where there are shadows. And transparency. From our leaders, from our courts, and from our own institutions. Third, we build systems that don't let power and wealth create immunity. That means fighting corruption, and that means accountability, no matter how big your bank account or your title may be. You see, fixing democracy isn't just about elections or political parties. It's about rebuilding trust. It's about proving that the promise carved into our courthouses, equal justice under law, actually means something. Because if we don't, then the next Epstein is already out there. So today, here's what you can do right now. Pay attention to your local justice system. Who's running for prosecutor or for judge? Are they independent, or are they backed by the same entrenched money that has caused problems in the past? Ask them questions. Support investigative journalism. The Epstein case only cracked open because reporters refused to let it go. Find those trusted news sources. I listen to a wide variety, including Up First from NPR and Will Westmoreland from the Back 40. But we've got to support those journalists. Read, listen, and support us monetarily when you can. And the next thing you can do, talk about it. Don't let cynicism become the excuse for silence. Corruption thrives when we say, that's just how it is. And finally, demand better from your government, from your institutions, from your community, and your politicians. We can't undo what happened to the girls that were affected by Jeffrey Epstein. But we can make sure their story forces us to act. Because democracy is only as strong as the courage of its people. And now you know what comes next. It's up to us. All right. Now grab your coffee, buckle your seatbelt, or make sure your toddler's in theirs, and let's cruise through this week's headlines. We'll go from around the world through DC and swing by Springfield, landing right back here in central Illinois. Let's go. First stop, global news. Things are relatively calm in the big world capitals, which is kind of like saying your toddler is quiet in the next room. A little suspicious, maybe. In Southeast Asia, shifting alliances and some economic jitters have leaders on edge, while the UN is sounding the alarm on record-breaking heat waves affecting millions. Now, you might be thinking, I'm just trying to keep the electric bill paid. Why do I care about this? Well, all these global tremors show up in the price of our coffee beans, whether or not we can plan for vacations next year, and in environmental policies that we're going to be talking about for decades. If any of these topics of a special concern to you, let me know. I'm happy to unpack these in a future episode. Moving closer in on the U.S., this one stings a bit. As we talked about last episode, Congress just pulled $1 billion in federal support for public media. Yeah, that's a B for billion. So what does that mean? Small town public radio stations and TV stations, like the ones in Charleston and Springfield, are about to feel the pinch really hard. Some of them rely on that funding for up to 70% of their budgets. So think fewer kids programming, fewer local news segments, and a whole lot more on-air fundraising drives with sad music playing in the background. If you're like me and grew up on PBS Kids, Mr. Rogers, or NPR, this story is worth keeping an eye on. We might have to rally up for our local news stations, or at least stock up on some coffee mugs from all those pledge drives. Here in Illinois, two stories have gotten my attention here this week. First, a tragic police chase in Wood River on July 3rd ended with 2 lives lost. A lawsuit in Madison County now claims officers pursued too aggressively over minor infractions. It's sparking yet another round of hard conversation about accountability and public safety. And then there's the housing crisis that is ongoing here in central Illinois. Here's the blunt truth. To afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment in Illinois, you now have to make almost $30 an hour. That's more than double the minimum wage here in Illinois. About 7 out of 10 renter households are severely cost burdened, which is just a polite way of saying working families are being squeezed like never before. So, not light news here in Illinois, but important the same. And here in just central Illinois, it has been very busy this week. First, health alert. The Illinois Department of Public Health just added 180 more zip codes, including Sangamon and Macoupin counties, to the high-risk lead exposure list. That means mandatory lead testing for kids at 12 and 24 months will soon be the norm. And yes, they're rolling that out with home inspections and family education programs. So at least there's not just here's the bad news and good luck. On the brighter side, there are some really great things happening for families. If you have ever heard of the organization Birth to Five, they are expanding early childhood resources in Morgan, Cass, Pike, Brown, Adams, and Scott counties. They're connecting families with screenings, childcare support, and local services. And a shout out for our Jacksonville families. They are getting a new rural autism clinic this fall, bringing speech therapy, behavioral analysis, and educational help to families who've been driving hours for care. They even have gotten a ribbon cutting and a hiring fair next week. So, hey, some jobs opening. And just for fun, Illinois College is launching a women's flag football team. Coach Mark Grounds will lead the Lady Blues, and they'll start competing in spring 2026. I'm just saying, I might have to dust off my speakers for this one. I haven't played in years. So, yes, we've got some challenges, but we've also got neighbors stepping up for one another. And that's really the heart of Central Illinois right there. Meanwhile, in education news, McMurray College archives have been dug into by the sociologists looking at how the model minority myth of Japanese Americans started during World War II. Turns out a lot of young Japanese American women framed their education around serving the greater good, which unfortunately got twisted into stereotypes that still exist today. A powerful reminder that history isn't just old stuff, it's living with us, shaping culture even now. And then over in Macomb at Western Illinois University, they are struggling. Western Illinois has always held a special place in my heart. I had a friend over there that meant a lot to me. And it's very sad for me to report that enrollment has dropped almost 50% since 2010, which means fewer students, fewer businesses staying open, and smaller budgets for the schools and infrastructure there. When a college town shrinks, like we've talked about Lincoln College in the past, it doesn't just lose students, it loses lifeblood. It's a sobering trend for rural communities across the state. And I think we're going to have to wrap it up with some fun happenings coming up soon. Taylorville, if you are nearby Christian County, they're holding a community health and resource fair on July 30th. There's going to be free health services and resources for family. And I know a lot of communities are doing back to school events like this. So check your local events calendar and see what's happening close to you. And I think that is our weekly wrap up for what's happening around the globe, the country, and here in our own backyard. From international heat waves to local football dreams, it all connects back to how we live, work, and care for one another here in Central Illinois. So, stay curious, stay kind, and never forget, community isn't something we have, it's something we do. Again, my name is Jen McMillan, and this has been Sunshine Strategies Radio. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me today, and I'll see you next time.